Did you know that one of the most powerful war films ever made was almost never finished? Gallipoli, the 1981 masterpiece, changed how the world saw Australian courage and sacrifice. But behind those stunning desert scenes and unforgettable moments, there are secrets that even longtime fans have never heard. From dangerous stunts to heartbreaking real moments, this film's story is just as incredible as the movie itself. The young actors risked their lives. The director battled against odds, and somehow they created something that still makes audiences cry today. Let's dive in and discover 20 weird and amazing facts about Gallipoli. Fact number 20. The desert heat nearly killed everyone. Peter Weir's cast and crew filmed in the scorching deserts of Egypt under temperatures that sometimes reached 120 degrees Fahrenheit. The heat was so intense that actors would lose pounds of body weight in a single day of shooting. Mark Lee, who played the young runner Archie, was completely exhausted after long takes beneath the burning sun. The crew had to keep ice water constantly available, and medics stood by at all times. Camera equipment would malfunction from the heat, lenses would fog up, and film stock could actually warp. What looked like authentic, peaceful desert scenes came from real suffering. The cast wasn't just acting out the horrors of war. They were physically experiencing a kind of torture themselves, though nothing compared to what the real Gallipoli soldiers endured. It looked like an adventure on film, but it was absolutely brutal. Fact number 19. Mel Gibson's original role was completely different. Before Mel Gibson became the charismatic, rebellious Frank Dunn, the character was supposed to be very different. The script originally wrote Frank as a more serious, hardened young man without much humor, but Gibson brought something unexpected to the role: a wild energy, a cheeky charm, and genuine rebellion that made audiences love him instantly. Director Peter Weir saw Gibson's natural charm and rewrote scenes on the fly to match his personality. Some of Gibson's best lines were improvised, thrown in during takes because he was being authentically himself. The chemistry between Gibson and Mark Lee felt so real and natural because Gibson's improvisation forced Lee to react genuinely. What started as a written character became something more alive because an actor brought his true self to the screen. That wasn't just acting, that was real connection between two performers. Fact number 18. They built trenches that were terrifyingly realistic. The production team didn't just film near some old trenches and call it a day. They constructed actual, historically accurate trenches on location, complete with everything soldiers would have experienced: mud, rats, the smell of gunpowder, and claustrophobic tight spaces. These weren't movie prop trenches that looked good from far away. They were deep, narrow, muddy channels where actors and cameras could actually descend into the earth. Actors had to crawl through these trenches, squeeze into corners, and experience a genuine feeling of being trapped. Claustrophobic actors struggled. Some actually panicked underground. The team kept careful watch to make sure nobody had a breakdown. When you watch the trench scenes, that look of pure terror in the actors' eyes, much of that came from being in a real, deep hole in the ground, with bombs exploding nearby. The realism wasn't created in post-production. It was carved into the earth. Fact number 17. Real explosions were used, not movie magic. Peter Weir made a choice that would make modern safety directors go pale. For many of the battle scenes, the crew used actual explosives and real dynamite detonations rather than special effects. They'd set off real explosions while cameras rolled, with actors positioned carefully but genuinely close to the blasts. The sound was authentic because it was actually happening. The shockwaves were real. The danger was real. Modern films use computers and CGI to create explosions that look perfect and feel controlled. Gallipoli used actual fire and thunder. Actors had to trust their director, trust their positioning, and trust that the explosive specialists knew exactly what they were doing. If something went wrong, nobody was coming back from that. No actor died or was seriously injured, but every single explosion was a genuine risk. The visceral power you feel watching those battle scenes comes from authentic danger that modern audiences rarely experience in cinema anymore. Fact number 16. Mark Lee and Mel Gibson. did dangerous stunts without stunt doubles. When Frank and Archie run across open fields while bullets whiz around them, that's really Mark Lee and Mel Gibson running. When they dive into trenches or leap over obstacles, those are the actual young actors doing the work. Peter Weir wanted to capture something real, the vulnerability of actual bodies moving through dangerous spaces. Stunt doubles existed in 1981, but Weir rarely used them for his two leads. Both actors trained extensively to perform their own stunts. They would run through fields while pyrotechnics exploded behind them. They would fall into mud and dirt without knowing exactly where they'd land. Mark Lee, in particular, threw himself into the physical demands with fearless commitment. There were close calls. There were injuries. But both actors wanted audiences to see them, to know it was really them facing danger. That authenticity created a connection between viewer and performer that couldn't exist if a double had replaced them. What looked thrilling on screen was actually two young men putting their bodies on the line. Fact number 15. The film's ending was shot last, and everyone knew it. In an unusual decision, Peter Weir saved the emotionally devastating final scenes for the very end. Production. Every actor knew exactly what was coming. They'd read the script. They knew their characters would die, but they didn't film those scenes until the last day. This meant that for weeks of shooting, everyone carried the weight of that knowledge. Mark Lee and Mel Gibson looked at each other every day, knowing these would be their final moments as Archie and Frank. The crew knew they were building toward tragedy. When they finally shot the ending, the emotional exhaustion was total and authentic. The actors weren't just pretending to say goodbye. They were actually saying goodbye to these characters after weeks together. Tears weren't fake. Embraces weren't performed. The ending carries such power because it was genuinely the end of a journey. Peter Weir's choice to film backward through the story meant that the final scenes came with real grief, not just imagined emotion. The last shot held everything everyone had built together for months. Fact number 14. Egyptian authorities nearly shut down. Production Egypt, where much of the film was shot, wasn't entirely comfortable with a foreign film crew recreating a military battle on their soil. Local authorities had concerns about the explosions, the large military recreations, and the presence of so many foreign filmmakers. There were tense moments where officials threatened to shut everything down. Peter Weir had to carefully negotiate with government representatives, explain the historical importance of the project, and prove that safety measures were in place. Political situation in Egypt during production added another layer of risk that audiences watching the finished film would never know about. If authorities had decided to close the production, everything would have been lost. All the footage, all the work, all the investment. But somehow, through diplomacy and determination, the crew convinced officials to let them finish. The finished film almost didn't exist because of decisions made by people in offices thousands of miles away from the cameras. That wasn't acting or filmmaking. That was real-world problem-solving under intense pressure. Fact number 13. The film almost had a different composer. Peter Weir initially considered hiring a different composer for the score, someone more experimental and less traditionally orchestral. But then he heard the work of John Williams and knew immediately that Gallipoli needed orchestral beauty, not avant-garde complexity. Williams created a score that feels both triumphant and mournful, like a eulogy for youth and innocence. The famous piano theme that plays during quiet moments was Williams's addition. Weir hadn't imagined it, but when he heard it, he understood that music would define the emotional heart of the film. If a different composer had been chosen, if Weir had stuck with his original instinct, the movie would feel completely different. John Williams's music doesn't just accompany the images. It becomes the emotional truth underneath every scene. The score has been performed by orchestras around the world. It's studied in music schools. But none of that would have happened if Weir had made a different choice during pre-production. Sometimes one decision changes everything that comes after. Fact number 12. Archie and Frank's final embrace was filmed only once. When Archie and Frank embrace each other before the fatal charge, that moment was captured in only one take. Peter Weir didn't ask for another angle, another perspective, or a backup version. He got what he needed in that single moment of two young men holding each other, knowing they were about to face death. Mark Lee and Mel Gibson had rehearsed the scene, but there's an authenticity in that one take that no amount of reshooting could improve. If the film had been damaged or lost, that moment would be gone forever. There was no safety net, no insurance policy in the form of alternate takes. It's the kind of bold filmmaking choice that would make insurance companies nervous. But it's also the kind of choice that creates genuine power on screen. That embrace carries weight because it was real, because it was captured just once, because it mattered in a way that perfect, polished, multiple-take filmmaking sometimes can't achieve. One moment, captured forever, that changed how audiences understand friendship and sacrifice. Fact number 11. The script changed during filming based on location. Peter Weir is famous for being flexible and responsive to his environment. As the crew filmed in Egypt, Weir would look at the actual landscape and rewrite scenes to take advantage of what was there. If a particular field looked more beautiful than the script suggested, he'd rewrite the scene to stay there longer. If a location created an unexpected emotional feeling, he'd add new dialogue or moments. The screenplay wasn't locked in stone. It was a living document that evolved as production happened. This meant that Mark Lee and Mel Gibson sometimes received new pages the night before shooting. Actors had to be adaptable and quick thinking. Some of their best scenes came from this spontaneous process. Professional screenwriters might have objected to their work being constantly rewritten, but this script was written by David Williamson specifically for Peter Weir, and they collaborated closely. The final film feels inevitable and perfectly crafted, but that perfection came from constant adjustment and response to reality. The movie was written in the desert, not just in a studio office. Fact number 10. Mark Lee was only 21 years old. During filming, when Mark Lee was cast as Archie, he was a young, relatively unknown actor in Australian cinema. He brought a beautiful vulnerability and authenticity to the role that no older, more experienced actor could have provided. His youth wasn't just acting, it was his actual life stage. Everything Archie experiences, Mark was experiencing too in a way. Playing a 21-year-old character was exactly his real age. This authenticity is part of why the film feels so emotionally true. We're watching a genuinely young person experience coming of age, friendship, love, and death. There's no performance of youth. There's just youth itself, caught on camera. Mark Lee's face shows the real confusion and wonder of someone that age. His body moves with actual young person energy and vulnerability. The role demanded a quality that only genuine youth could provide, and casting the right age was crucial to the film's power. Mel Gibson was already established and older, but Mark Lee brought something that cast a newcomer in the lead role of an ensemble piece was exactly right. His real age made everything more real. Fact number 9. The film changed how Australia sees its own history. Before Gallipoli, the Gallipoli campaign was taught in schools as a historical event, important but distant. After this film came out, the Gallipoli story became central to Australian identity and national pride. The film sparked renewed interest in the Gallipoli campaign. More Australians visited the historical site. Historians began deeper research into the real soldiers' experiences. The movie didn't just entertain audiences, it shifted how an entire nation understood its past and its sacrifice. Peter Weir created something that was simultaneously a personal story about two young friends and an epic portrait of national identity. Artists, teachers, and historians were influenced by this film. It inspired other filmmakers to explore Australian history with greater depth. What started as a production that Egyptian authorities nearly shut down became a cultural touchstone that still influences how Australians think about courage, youth, and loss. A film can be just entertainment, or it can reshape how millions of people understand their own history. Gallipoli did both. Fact number 8. The real Gallipoli survivors approved the film. Before the film's release, Peter Weir showed it to surviving veterans of the actual Gallipoli campaign. These were men who had lived through the real horror, the real suffering, and the real death. They could have said the film was exploitative or inaccurate. Instead, they gave their blessing. Veterans said the film captured something true about the experience, not the literal details of every moment, but the emotional and spiritual truth of what they lived through. Some veterans wept watching the film. Others said it finally helped their families understand what they'd endured. This approval from people who actually lived through Gallipoli gave the film an authority that no amount of historical research could provide. Peter Weir wasn't just making a war movie. He was creating a memorial, a way for future generations to understand and honor the sacrifice of real people. The veterans' approval meant that the filmmakers got something fundamentally important right, even as they took creative liberties with specific events and characters. Real testimony validates artistic choices in ways that critics and audiences cannot. Fact number 7. Mel Gibson's character was written as Australian, but he's actually American. This is one of Hollywood's open secrets, but audiences watching Gallipoli might not realize that the charming, rebellious Frank Dunn is played by an American actor. Mel Gibson was born in New York. His accent in the film sounds authentically Australian because he worked extensively with dialect coaches. Gibson is Australian by citizenship. His family moved to Australia when he was young, but his natural accent is American. For the role of Frank, he needed to sound like a working-class Australian young man. Gibson threw himself into the accent work. He studied how Australian men spoke, the rhythm of their language, the specific inflections. His Australian accent in Gallipoli is so convincing that many viewers never questioned it. What audiences hear as authentic Australian comes from careful training and dedication to craft. This kind of accent work is invisible when it's done well. You don't notice it, you just believe the character. Gibson's commitment to authenticity, even in something as specific as accent, shows the level of dedication the entire cast brought to this film. The accent serves the story, not the actor's nationality. Fact number 6. The film's cinematography was inspired by classical painting. Russell Boyd studied classical war paintings, the romantic, tragic depictions of battle that were popular in the 19th century. Boyd wanted to bring that aesthetic to film, creating images that looked almost painterly. The compositions of many scenes echo the work of historical painters who depicted war and sacrifice. This sounds like a subtle technical choice, but it profoundly affects how audiences emotionally experience the film. Classical paintings of war carry a quality of nobility and tragedy. By adopting visual language from those paintings, Boyd and Weir created images that feel timeless and historically significant. When Archie and Frank run through fields or stand against horizons, the cinematography makes them look like figures from an old painting. Noble, young, doomed. This visual choice elevates the personal story into something that feels like it's about all young soldiers, all sacrifice, all loss. The film doesn't look like a typical 1981 action movie. It looks like history itself, because it was designed to look like how we remember history through art. That visual choice came from deep thinking about how to tell a story that matters. Fact number 5. Peter Weir refused to show graphic violence. It's surprising to modern viewers, but Gallipoli actually contains less graphic violence than many contemporary war films. Peter Weir made a deliberate choice not to fill the screen with gore and mutilation. Instead, he focused on emotional truth and human connection. The film's power comes not from showing bodies being destroyed, but from showing young people facing mortality. When characters die, Weir often cuts away, rather than showing the moment of death in detail. This restraint was controversial at the time. Some critics thought Weir was avoiding the harsh reality of war. But Weir understood that sometimes what you don't show is more powerful than what you do. The empty moment after death, the silence after violence, the emotional impact on survivors. These create deeper responses than graphic imagery. Decades later, audiences still find the film emotionally devastating without needing to see explicit gore. Weir's choice to trust the audience's imagination and emotional intelligence proved more effective than graphic realism. The restraint doesn't diminish the film's power, it amplifies it. Fact number 4. The film was made for a modest budget and still transformed cinema. Gallipoli didn't have a massive Hollywood budget. It was an Australian production with significant financial constraints. But Peter Weir, Mark Lee, Mel Gibson, and the entire crew created something so powerful that it competed with and influenced major international productions. The film proves that emotional authenticity and artistic vision matter more than budget size. Weir couldn't rely on expensive special effects or elaborate sets. Instead, he relied on story, performance, location, and human truth. The desert became a character itself. The relationships between actors became the emotional core. The historical importance of the story gave weight to every scene. A smaller budget forced creative choices that turned out to be brilliant decisions. The film was nominated for major international awards. It influenced how war films were made afterward. It proved that a story told with integrity and passion could match anything created with 10 times the budget. Money enables production, but courage, intelligence, and heart create art. Gallipoli succeeded because it had all three. Fact number 3. The film's release changed. When a real war broke out, production on Gallipoli finished, but the film's release date had to change because of real-world events. Tensions in the Middle East, including conflicts involving Australia, made the timing of a war film sensitive and complicated. The distributor worried about the film's reception during actual military conflicts, so the release was delayed, pushed to a different season, adjusted to a moment when audiences could watch it without the interference of real, current violence happening in the world. This practical decision shows how deeply art and reality are connected. A film about historical war can't be released during current war without the real events shaping how audiences receive the story. Peter Weir's artistic vision remained unchanged, but the world changed around it. The delay meant additional waiting, additional tension, additional uncertainty about whether the film would find an audience. When it finally did release, audiences had been waiting, and the film found its moment. Sometimes, timing in cinema is completely out of the filmmaker's control. External reality decides when a story can be heard. Fact number 2. Mel Gibson's chemistry with Mark Lee was completely unplanned. Casting director didn't initially think Mel Gibson and Mark Lee would work as a team. Gibson was experienced and had leading man charisma. Lee was young, vulnerable, relatively unknown. On paper, they seemed mismatched. But when they read together during auditions, something unexpected happened. They created an immediate electric connection. The actors found an authenticity together that surprised everyone in the room. Part of it came from their actual age difference. Gibson as the slightly older friend, protecting and challenging the younger one. Part of it came from genuine chemistry that you can't manufacture or predict. Directors hope for this kind of connection, but can't guarantee it. You can have two perfect actors who don't click emotionally. You can have mismatched performers who somehow create magic together. Gibson and Lee fell into the second category. Their friendship on screen feels so real because their actual connection as performers created something genuine. Audiences feel that authenticity. The film's emotional power rests significantly on the trust and affection between these two characters, and that trust came from real connection between the actors playing them. Chemistry isn't something you can hire. It's something that happens when the right people meet. Fact number 1. The final shot almost didn't exist. The famous final shot, that haunting image of young soldiers charging toward their death, was nearly lost to technical failure. During filming, a crucial piece of equipment malfunctioned. The camera that was capturing that shot nearly stopped working. Cameraman Russell Boyd had to make a split-second decision to continue rolling or accept that the shot might be lost forever. He continued. The footage came out perfect. That decision, made in a moment of crisis, preserved what became one of the most iconic images in cinema history. If the camera had failed completely, Peter Weir would have had to restage the scene or find a different way to end the film. But that particular moment, that specific take with that light and those actors and that motion, it couldn't be replicated. The final charge toward death had to be captured in exactly one take, with no safety net, with equipment that almost failed. When you watch that final shot and feel the weight of it, remember that the image almost never reached you. It exists because of luck, because of bravery, because of a decision made in a moment of technical crisis. Bonus fact: the original score recording session was nearly interrupted. John Williams recorded the Gallipoli score with a full orchestra in a London recording studio. During one crucial session, recording the film's most emotional moments, a fire alarm went off in the building. The orchestra had to stop. Everyone had to evacuate. Williams worried that the emotional momentum was lost, that they'd have to re-record everything. But incredibly, when they returned to the studio, the orchestra members immediately found that place of emotional intensity again. They picked up where they left off as if no interruption had occurred. Musicians call this a rare kind of professional magic, when an ensemble is so connected to the music and the emotional truth of what they're creating that they can stop and start without losing the heart of the performance. That recording, captured across multiple sessions, but feeling unified and whole, became the soul of the film. John Williams' score carries the spiritual weight of an entire nation's grief and memory. That the recording session almost burned down, almost was disrupted beyond repair, reminds us that art survives accidents and obstacles through dedication and connection. Old tools, new magic, fire alarms and orchestras, and human determination creating something eternal. Gallipoli isn't just a movie about war. It's a story about courage, friendship, and the sacrifice of young people who didn't truly understand what they were facing. Peter Weir, Mark Lee, Mel Gibson, and an entire dedicated crew risked everything to tell this story truthfully. They worked in extreme heat, used real explosions, performed their own dangerous stunts, and poured their hearts into every scene. The film changed how audiences understand history. It moved real survivors to tears. It proved that a smaller budget and bold artistic choices could create something as powerful as any blockbuster. Behind every beautiful shot, every emotional moment, every devastating second, there's a story of commitment, danger, and care. That's what makes Gallipoli eternal. If you enjoyed these stories and secrets from behind the scenes, please subscribe for more. Every movie hides a truth, and we'll keep uncovering them, one story at a time. Thank you for watching. For